Right. So in our continued quest to, learn about food services industry, right? This is the second presentation I'm doing on food services industry. So hopefully, we are slowly but steadily, we are building towards understanding in a global industry that we are a big part of now. Because Cisco being the biggest player in food services industry in the world, naturally, you and me are all part of this big discussion, big challenges that are, ahead of us. So my task today is to kind of venture into 4 specific, big challenges that, that affects us directly or indirectly, no matter where you are, whether you are in direct, Cisco projects, or whether you are in cake, which is indirectly again in the food services industry, right? So without further ado, let's hop into it. Before we start off, a quick question. What do you think is the single biggest challenge in front of human civilization as of now? Just ideas, if just random thoughts. What do you think is the biggest challenge that the humanity faces right now? Any ideas? Space exploration challenge, okay. 1. What else? Global warming, climate change, right? Drinking water related to climate change, and again, limited resources that we have. Any other ideas? Sorry? Food, yeah, food safety, right? Because we inherit a, globe which is now 7 billion plus people and limited resources. So food safety is naturally one of the biggest challenges that is in front of us. And there are lots of other challenges, climate change, space exploration, lots and lots of things that are, in front of us. So similarly, any industry will also look at, what are the biggest challenges, in front of them. Naturally, right? I mean, just similar to, IT industry, any company, any industry. And food services industry being an $800 billion industry in US, naturally they'll be focused on what are the next big things, what are the next set of challenges that, we face. So we are going to dive into some of that. And with regards to being Cisco, right? I mean, how this affects Cisco is kind of what we are trying to focus today on, right? And my presentation today is based on a study done by the FSR magazine. This is a magazine related to food services. So in 2017, they did a study of, they had a whole bunch of, executives and, big shots in the food services industry getting together for a conference. So they had a study of, from their point of view, from the industry itself, to understand what are the biggest challenges that they are facing. So these 4 challenges that I have listed out here, I hope everybody in the back can see, are the 4 big challenges that this forum identified. So starting off, food safety and traceability is identified as a big challenge. Structuring your limited time offers and offer programs. Any distributor, any food supplier, any food services company from restaurant to Cisco to even manufacturers will have offers, right? I mean, you understand the reason for offers, for promotional purposes, for getting rid of your stocks or whatever. How you want to structure those limited time offers and promotion programs is another big challenge that food services companies, food services industry faces. Third one is coordination between purchasing and shipping. How we know this affects the food services industry. And the last one is more towards technology in terms of how big data can be leveraged. You've heard this term, right? I mean, big data, I'm sure most of you have heard of it. We'll, look into that, how big data also plays a part in, food services. So these 4 challenges is what we are going to dive into more detail, right? So naturally, before we start with the first challenge, you guys have to understand what I'm trying to do now. If you take, for example, food safety, that itself is a huge topic. I mean, it's a separate learning stream itself. So naturally, I can't teach you or tell you everything about food safety and traceability in just the 20 minutes that I have. What I'm hoping I'll do is I'll plant a few seeds in your heads. So you guys can go back and maybe read up a little more about it. Talk to people, with Cisco about it, how they're doing some of these things. My expectation is that I will plant a few seeds, today in your heads, and then you will take it back and hopefully you will grow and cultivate it. Make sense? So that's the agreement we have, right? So let's dive into the first particular challenge, food safety and traceability. Do you guys know what food safety is? Now in this country, unfortunately, you are not that particular about food safety, right? I mean, nobody questions when you eat those elolu roti where the, where it came from. That's kind of our culture. I mean, we're not really particular about it, but increasingly people are more conscious about it. Put it into European or, so-called developed countries context, people are much more aware of it. So let's dig into a bit of details, right? In US itself, there are about 4 or 5 different organizations, government bodies that are directly responsible for food safety and traceability. So starting off from the left-hand corner, there's the US Department of Agriculture. There's a separate body called the Center of Disease and Control for Prevention. So CDS, basically that is again looking at customer health point of view. There's the US Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, which is playing a major role in terms of food safety standards and policies and so on. And Environment Agency, that is basically the US Environment Regulatory Agency, as well as, can you believe that even Homeland Security, for example, plays a part in food safety. So this is why any company who's in the food services industry in US, there are lots of regulatory requirements, and this is, mind you, is not the entire set. There are local governing bodies as well, because United States is a collection of different states, right? So they individually, at individual state level, there are even more regulatory requirements. So that's why from a food supplier, food services company point of view, all of these traceability requirements are very important. So let's look at the reasons. Primary reason, preparedness. If you have to recall a product, for example, let's say, as you know, the supply chains are much more global and widespread right now, right? I mean, gone are the days where people used to cultivate your own food, in the local area and, purchase from the local area and, consume. Maybe 100 years ago is when, when that sort of concept was more, that was the only concept around. Now, our products or what we consume as consumers come from all over the world because of, the globalization and the easy, logistics that are, there, specialities that are there. So in terms of, traceability, how prepared you are to handle crisis situations. Let's say you have a particular product that has gone out and is causing, stomach bug, for example. And then you have to recall those products. To recall that, to understand, to be ready for that, particular aspect of, supply, you need to be prepared. And that's where traceability is very important, to know where things came from. We'll look into this in more detail as we go along. And then based on your preparedness, your response will be much more accurate, right? If you know where these different, say, a particular batch of food which is, not good for, human consumption, for example, you are able to respond to that situation much faster, more accurately, without particular consequences. Third one is recovery. How do you recover from a situation like that? When there's a particular issue with, food safety related something, how do you recover from that situation? How are you able to identify where the problem happened? And then, naturally, prevention. How do you make sure in the future such problems don't happen? This is why, these are the 4 primary reasons why food traceability, the ability to trace your food to its source and the manufacturing process is important, right? So let's look into more details. Now this is an example map of canned tuna, salmon tin, not salmon in this case, tuna for example. If you look at tuna production in the world, in US, consumption for example, tuna is not caught off, the US, sea area for that matter, it's caught somewhere else. For example, most of the production of tuna happens in the Pacific Ocean or, Japan, that sort of, areas, for example. And then that tuna goes into, initially captured by, say, fishermen, goes into some sort of, freezing where, you have to keep it until you get back to shore, for example, before you can process it and can it. It will be frozen. And then the processing part of it happens in various other countries, in different firms, for example. The canning part of it. So if you think about it, the can will come from some other country. The can that you're, packaging it in. The chemicals that you put into, the preservatives or whatever might come from China, for example. Whereas the actual canning happens in New Zealand or somewhere like that. And then you have a whole global route where, it ends up in from shipping to storage to ultimately ending up in the US consumer or the storage in US and then being sold. As you can see, it's a vast supply chain that spans the entire globe. So in this sort of situation, if you're asked to, trace, let's say a particular batch of tuna is not right. Let's say there's a little more lead than what is, safe to, consume. Let's say a hypothetical example, right? And that lead was, let's say, for example, came from a chemical that was used for preservative, right? How do you now trace it back and say, look, the problem happened in some chemical that you used in your preserving, when you're preserving the tuna for future consumption? How do you trace that back? Because it spans across different countries, it spans across different suppliers and, producers, and then packaging, shifting, shipping, all of that. My point is, the traceability aspect in a global supply chain is far more complex than what it meets the eye. Now, when we get a product into our hand, we don't realize how many layers or how many interactions it has gone through before it ends up in our hand. Does that make sense? So, this is why traceability has become one of the biggest challenges for food services industry. Right, moving on. Naturally, it's public health concerns that drives this, whole initiative, right? When the more people are educated, the more people are aware of, what you are putting into your body. Naturally, the human, health aspects of it drives the demand for traceability or, food safety and quality control and all of that. But it's the financial impact that kind of drives this whole thing. Now, for example, in a study done by the Grocery Manufacturers Association of US, it was found that to recall a product, let's say you have a particular problem with a product and you want to recall that batch of product, 52% of the time it costs more than $10 million to recall a particular bad product, for example. Depending on how much you have to pay for returning that product, compensation you might have to pay for different people who have consumed it. No, it takes more than $10 million 52% of the time. You can imagine the significance of that, right? And out of that, 23% of the time, it costs more than $30 million to recall. That is the financial impact of, to a certain extent, indicative of the financial impact when it comes to having to recall a particular product back. That's what kind of drives the companies to invest more into traceability. Make sense? Why are we more conscious about food safety? Have you guys given thought to it? Now, for example, I know Yasin just had a baby. Not him, wife had a baby. Now I'm sure you are conscious about what you're going to feed him, right? I'm being a parent myself. I know compared to my childhood when I ate everything, now I'm a little more conscious. I'm like looking for organic food and naturally, little more conscious about it because I'm aware of it. And that's kind of what drives this whole process. Because as we become more globalized and, people interact more, the diseases are not localized, right? A particular salmonella, infection that happens in Sri Lanka, some, let's say, a batch of fruit might end up in US, for example. Earlier in our human civilization, that was not the case. If you had a local problem, that was localized. Now it's more global, right? I mean, it can go within a week, it can spread all over the world. So that's why people are more conscious. Higher visibility of recalls. If you have to recall a particular, say, famous product or whatever, it will end up in CNN. You hear these stories, right? I mean, you say this particular company sent this particular food down there, recalling it. There's very much higher visibility when it comes to it. And also there are a lot of counterfeits, right? Even for consumables, there are, counterfeits with different branding, different stuff that, fraudulent activities. I don't know, I saw a video just recently of shrimp production in Vietnam. I don't know whether you guys have seen that video where to make the shrimp look bigger and better and chunkier, they individually inject a particular chemical into the dead shrimp so that it looks plumper, nice, and juicy and whatever. But that chemical comes from China. And nobody in Vietnam knows what's in that chemical. It's like when you dissolve it in water, it becomes like a colorless gel. And that's what you inject into the shrimp to make it bigger. There are lots of fraudulent activities like that. People become creative, right? I mean, when you see short-term profits or whatever, there can be activities like that. That's why Now, we need to be a little more conscious about how this food is actually prepared. And then few more things like lower health standards in different countries. When you have a global supply chain, the strict rules that you might have in your country might not apply in, for example, in China or Bangladesh or wherever, right? There might be different standards when it comes to health and food safety, quality controls. And also when you have large, long supply chains, the food from production to actual consumption might be in transit for a long period of time. Now, for example, the apples that we consume in this country, you guys have seen those videos as well, right? When you put it on hot water, you can see the wax dissolving. Why do you put wax? Because when you get an apple down from the tree or whatever, you pluck it from the tree, it might last for a few days. But in our case, it has to last all the way from the country that it was produced and up till it's shipped here. And that's why there's more chemicals and all sorts of preservatives that will go into our food. And that is another factor that affects food safety. And even increased threat of terrorism is another reason why, for example, let's say a country that produces some particular item, in US, and if you want to, kill a few people in US or whatever, you might contaminate it intentionally. So that's why these are the different factors from a consumer point of view that demands the food services industry to be more transparent, more quality controlled across the board. What does that mean from an organization point of view? Again, from, let's say, if you're Cisco, what does that mean? What it means is that you need to be conscious about the economic losses. Say, for example, in Cisco's context, one of our catch lines is, good things come from Cisco, right? That's one of our taglines, Cisco, good things come from Cisco. Imagine after that tagline, you give something which is contaminated. The impact of, the economic impact, your reputation and that product or brand or whatever will be enormous. That's why companies are more conscious about it. The rising distrust in the food supply chain. People don't trust each other anymore because there are lots of bad players. Doesn't mean that everybody is bad. Everybody wants to sell, garbage. But at the end of the day, there's not a lot of trust, right? And greater demand. As you know, there's more demand towards making sure there are, for example, proper safety standards are followed. You want to know whether it's not produced by child labor, for example. People are more conscious about it. If you know, for example, a particular product is made in the fields and the fields are, employing child labor, will you consume that product? Naturally, because we are conscious about some of that, we might not. So people have access to this information now, more often than not. So that's what companies have to contend with. And also, there's increased regulation. Naturally, when we have larger supply chains that spans across countries, counties, wherever, you will have more regulations, more custom checks, more procedures, more safety standards that you have to adhere to. And the last one is, to comply with regulations, that's a huge cost, right? So the more you are able to trace your food production from source to all the way to distribution, the regulatory costs that you might have will be lower. So these are some of the economic and social factors that affects companies to invest into quality control, quality management and traceability. Let's take the case of Cisco. Now I told you the tagline. Our tagline being Cisco, one of our taglines is, good things come from us. So naturally, we have as a company invested a lot into quality control. There is a dedicated 150 plus team who are solely dedicated for quality control, quality administration, quality assurance across the global supply chain. These guys are not the ones that are inspecting your food. These are guys at a higher level who set the safety standards. These are some of your agendas, right? They define the product quality, safety standards, whatever that is required to be met by the different suppliers. As you know, say Cisco doesn't produce all the food that they distribute, right? The actual manufacturing happens from various other third-party firms. So you become a supplier with Cisco, you have to adhere to these quality standards. Then the second one is qualifying suppliers for branding. So when you put the Cisco brand name, for example, on a particular product, you are qualifying that particular supplier or brand to make sure that they meet the standards that we are supposed to deliver. This is another responsibility of this particular unit in Cisco. Third one being the monitoring part of it. You have to continuously monitor to make sure that, suppliers or manufacturers don't take shortcuts or don't, just, put, sand in your face and do fraudulent activities. So that's where this department comes in. And it works across 40 different countries, across Latin America, wherever, Cisco sources some of their, material or some of their goods. They work across the board, and they have particular program called point source inspection. That is a specific standard which Cisco has produced to make sure the quality standards are met, right? So this is, again, as I said, I'm planting seeds. I mean, again, to go into details about Cisco quality assurance process is huge. There'll be lots of layers, lots of specific government acts and, regulations that they are following, and safety standards that, as a company that we follow. All of that is available in the Cisco website. So I hope you guys will take a few minutes and maybe go back and read, especially the QEs we have. It will be useful to understand what is the QA process of Cisco itself, right? Just the idea. And their mission is to make sure delivering Cisco brand product that meets the most exacting safety, reliability and quality standards. That's the mission of Cisco, to make sure we deliver what we promise. That's good things come from Cisco, promise. Right? So far with me? Excellent. A particular aspect of technology. How does this demand for traceability, food safety, when it comes to modern technology innovations, how does that work? Two particular concepts come to the forefront when it comes to food traceability and ability to quality control. That is blockchain and Internet of Things. You guys have heard about this, right? I mean, you guys, I'm sure most of you guys are experts on blockchain and how it works and how it's used in the bitcoins and electronic currency market. But the same concept can be used for traceability as well, along with Internet of Things. Now imagine an example, right? Let's say rice production. In most advanced countries or developed countries, production of agricultural produce, for example, is not done through human labor, right? Most of it is automated. When you put water, for example, it's automated. Crop dusting happens through planes, for example. There's no single person who will go around, spraying pesticide. It will happen at a mass scale through, maybe automated systems, for example. If you can connect those systems one to another, for example, how much of pesticides did you apply on a particular batch of food. Let's say you collect all of that information on a network. So all these different sensors that can be plugged into Internet of Things, gathering data about how much of pesticides, how much of water, when did you, take the crop out, how did you store it, what chemicals did you put it. There can be multitude of sensors and electronics that can be plugged into a network or Internet of Things that can record some of this data into a blockchain. Does that make sense? You guys know what blockchain is, right? I mean, blockchain basically means there are a few things that are going for blockchain. One is, it's difficult to fraudulate data. You can't just manipulate data in a blockchain, right? That's the whole purpose of having a blockchain for electronic cryptocurrencies. So similarly, it's difficult for anybody to manipulate this data for their benefit. That's one aspect of it. And secondly, there are lots of other advantages or applications of blockchain that can be used to trace this global food supply chain from end to end. So that's where this particular concept from agriculture, that is basically growing your food, from transformation, that is basically preparing or making that particular product. Let's say Nutella, for example, contains cocoa powder. There's this nuts, hazelnuts, some skim milk and stuff like that, sugar and stuff like that, right? So preparing that food, it's not only just one ingredient, there have been multiple ingredients. Converting those food, that is basically mixing and matching and whatever. Then you have the packaging part of it, where you might source different items from different people, different preservatives and so on. And then you have shipping, selling and consuming. If you can track this whole process through different devices, recording data into a blockchain, imagine how it can be used. It can be used to track even little minute details all the way back to the source. So if you have a particular contamination of a particular batch, let's say, you are able to pinpointly identify where the actual error happened, for example. So that's the emerging trend. I don't know whether you are aware of it, but there are even companies in Sri Lanka that are producing a particular solution for a supply chain blockchain, implementation. I can't remember the name of the company, but there is a specific company that's already, employing blockchain for food traceability, right? So that's one particular aspect, which is an emerging trend in our, business or line of business, where for traceability and quality management, blockchain and Internet of Things are creating inroads. Make sense? Right. Second challenge, structuring our limited time offers and promotional programs. You guys understand what a promotion is, right? I mean, you're basically talking about supply and demand. My experience over my 30 plus years of existence, the world runs on supply and demand. If you think about it, from employment to production to pricing to everything works on supply and demand. Promotions also, or limited time promotions or your seasonal promotions, all of that is to try and create this demand for our products. That's what we need to be aware of, supply and demand factors. So let's look into that. In modern food services industry, where complex supply chains are in place, making time or offer programs and structuring them in such a way is a complex algorithm because of various different factors. So let's try to understand a few of the main factors, right? So my focus today is to put supply and demand factors into both sides and try to understand what are the main factors that trigger you or push you in the way of trying to understand supply and demand. So on the supply side, you need to understand most products have different production cycles, right? I mean, being Sri Lankans, we know paddy is produced twice a year. Mahakanne, Yalakanne, right? So similarly, even every different product might have production cycles. So if you are aware of when they are cultivated, when they are actually produced, you need to take that into account when it comes to understanding your supply. You need to understand the opportunity costs. In certain times of the year, for example, let's say something is in abundance available, the price will drop because there's abundance of material available. So in that sort of a situation, it might be useful to purchase those goods and store it for future consumption. Those are the opportunity costs that we talk about, right? From a supply point of view, you have to understand what are the opportunities that are available depending on these variable production cycles. Then the third one being the competitive advantage people will have. Now Cisco, for example, to my knowledge, has a competitive advantage over other food suppliers in the US when it comes to beef. There are some certain aspects of beef production and distribution that Cisco specializes in. And that is a competitive advantage for Cisco. They will not want to let that go, for example, right? So when you're creating, let's say you're creating a promotional program, you might do that to make sure your competitor doesn't, eat into your market. So understanding those competitive advantages and, working towards building on top of those competitive advantages is another factor of supply. The last one being maximizing productivity. So for example, let's say depending on where this particular item is produced or in a different country, for example, if you have a big ship that, is going to carry that, back to you, you might want to optimize that and say, you want to get some other product from the same, country onto your particular shipment. So likewise, you might maximize your productivity based on the supply that is available. What is on the demand side? What do you think is the first thing? First thing is seasonal demands. You have to understand in US especially. Now we are not, as a country, we don't really think about seasons, right? I mean, every day is summer here, hardly any difference between, any time of the year. But in US, for example, during seasons, things change. We know from our cake experience, during summertime, people go to restaurants more. During winter, the consumption drops down. So there are various seasonal changes that are happening that will affect the demand for different goods. Second one, consumer behaviors, very important. Consumers behave in different trends, right? Now these days, for example, we are very much aware of organic food because there are trends going on along those lines. We are conscious about pesticides and all. So that's a consumer behavior. It has changed. So being aware of that from a demand point of view is very important. Third one, and economic, aspects and the spending power. We are all part of capitalism, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we are countries that run on capitalism. And one of the factors of capitalism is the purchasing power parity, one of the key concepts. Basically, what it means is that consumer-wise, how much are they able to spend? Does that make sense? Now, consumer behavior gets affected by how much of money you have in your pocket, right? So if the economy is doing bad, or if you can forecast that the economy is going to do bad, you might factor that into your supply and demand equations. You might know next year, this particular, say, high-end product will not sell the same amounts because the consumers might not have the money to spend on that particular product. So likewise, understanding those economics is very important. And the last one is minimizing waste. Nobody likes waste, right? I mean, waste is waste. And it's huge numbers if you think about it. In terms of food and, food services industry, the amount of waste that we have is huge. It's in the millions and billions. So naturally, we need to be conscious about how do we minimize waste when it comes to demand. When you try to define, or from a food services industry point of view, when you're trying to develop or structure your limited time offer, offer programs or promotion programs, understanding these dynamics and factoring those into your equations is very important. Say for example, if you run a ice cream promotion program in winter, it might not work with the seasonal demands, for example. I'm just using a very basic example. But similarly, when you're designing and structuring your programs from a food services company point of view, it's absolutely critical that you factor in all of those things. This is where, again, another application of data and data science and, analytics that plays a big role in, structuring your LTO and, promotions programs. So another challenge that is in front of food services industry. So far with me? Right, let's quickly go through. What are the key success factors for building a good promotional program? One is you can build demand. Any ideas on how do you build demand? What's the primary thing of building demand? Very straightforward answer. Promotions. What is promotion? Marketing. Through marketing campaigns, you can create, you can build interest, right? Now, my kid, for example, she's a big fan of, what do you call these, the egg-looking things, Kinder Joys. The fact is that she doesn't eat it. She buys it for the toy that comes with it. I have to eat the, Kinder Joy. What is that? That is creating a demand. There's no real actual consumption of the food, but through something else, you have built a demand for it. So that is important when it comes to creating success factors for your promotions programs. Second one, you are able to forecast better. And to forecast better, what do you need to have? To do forecasting, to predict that, okay, next year this is going to be like this, what do you need to have? Data. You need to have accurate data. And that's very important when it comes to your promotion program structuring. Third one, engaging ground level staff, or basically understanding the consumer behaviors, actual sales patterns and all of that. There's a lot of tacit knowledge that is there in the ground level people who are involved in distributing, selling, marketing, all of that. So tapping into that tacit knowledge is important when it comes to promotional programs. And the fourth one is big data. We'll come back to this a little later because that's a part of my follow-up, right? So far with me, halfway through. Third challenge is coordination between shipping and purchasing. Sounds very simple, straightforward, right? If you are a company which buys and sells, which food services companies are, you need to coordinate between when you're buying those purchases and when they are shipping them. Otherwise, what will happen? It's going to go to waste because most of these consumables, if you think about it, have an expiry date. So if you buy it and you can't sell it, naturally you're going to be in such a big soup. You'll have waste. So that's where our third challenge comes when it comes to coordinating between purchasing and selling. So what are the big picture challenges here? So this forum which did this study identified 4 key aspects when it comes to being able to coordinate better between purchasing, selling and distribution, right? The key word here is coordination. That's what you need to understand. These might be 2 different departments. For example, in Cisco, there will be a separate department who will handle the suppliers, who will purchase things and whatever. There will be a separate department who will be in selling and distributing and marketing these products. If you don't have coordination among these different departments, you are going to be in a soup. That's probably the reason why there are 65,000 employees working for Cisco, right? When you go to US or wherever, I mean, I've seen this where you wonder, what are all these people doing? When you have you been to the SBS office in Houston? I think few of you guys have. From one end of the office to the other, it's about half a mile just to walk, right? I mean, that's how big the particular, office we have in Houston. Not for Cisco labs, but Cisco. So you wonder, what are all these people doing? This is what they're doing. They are trying to coordinate between the purchasing. They have about, to my knowledge, there are about 200,000 different products that, Cisco sells. That's what they do. That's the whole purchasing, logistics, and, distribution part of, what as a company we do. So, big picture challenges, first one is freight, management. You need to have a very good coordination between different departments who manage different freights and shipping. Naturally, technology plays a big role here, right? ERP systems where you are able to manage your resources, coordinate between different aspects of your supply chain. So freight routing is a very important aspect. What is load consolidation? Any ideas? Dulita? What is load consolidation? What do you think? Correct. So, precisely what it is. Cisco employs, for example, 10,000 trucks that are running all over the continental US, right? 10,000 trucks, mind you. That's a lot of space to, put your goods and, send across. So there are two aspects to it. One is the cost factor of it. If you have empty trucks running around, naturally your cost is going to be much higher. So, and also food safety part of it as well. So depending on what you are, packaging and, distributing, you need to have good coordination between those routes and between, warehouses, between the trucks that are going, all over the place. So there has to be a very good system that gives us that ability to consolidate loads in the, when it comes to routing and shipping. Third one is planning your compliances. Now this goes back to the previous, first challenge that we had. There's a lot of regulatory requirements. So going from one state to the other, let's say you're producing something in California, sending it to Texas, for example, there might be regulatory, requirements before it reaches that particular state. The more you plan ahead, the more, you are prepared for the actual situations, and well as to make sure your distribution happens on a timely manner. There's transparency or there's coordination between when these things, arrive and, gets processed. Does that make sense? So planning your compliance part of it is a very big aspect when it comes to food supplies. And then the fourth one is your optimization of selling patterns or purchasing patterns, for example. This is what we talked about in the second challenge as well. Understanding your consumer behaviors, understanding production cycles, understanding all of that and optimizing it is a big challenge in front of food services organizations. How do you leverage on that? How do you optimize it? So these are the 4 specific areas that they have identified by coordination, by improving coordination between purchasing, manufacturing, purchasing, supply, transportation, distribution, marketing, all of that. The coordination part of it is a very big challenge that is in front of food services organizations. And these 4 have been identified as the primary challenges that they can actually look into or overcome in the long run, right? Fourth aspect, last one, big data. Now it's a buzzword, right? I mean, you hear this quite often about big data. What is big data? Engineering guys, you probably know. What is big data?
Data whose velocity, volume and variation or variety is high.
High. So this is something that I don't know whether you guys, everybody is aware of, something that we are also interested in. We are doing something called data lake, right? Aruna is not here to comment, but we have been doing something along these lines as well, because we have, in Cake for example, there are a lot of sources of data. Data coming from the actual systems, data coming from Pulse, data coming from Salesforce, various different sources, and try to accumulate data into one place so that you can really use it. To understand big data, I have put this, I have extracted this from a particular article. I know it kind of looks gibberish right now. Let me take a few minutes and explain, right? There's knowledge that you know of. Your explicit knowledge, so-called explicit knowledge. We know what we know. We know this is, if you do this, for example, this is what's going to happen. We know that. That is your explicit knowledge. And then you have tacit knowledge. What is tacit knowledge? Tacit knowledge is in people's heads through experiences, through what you have learned and mastered. It might not be explicitly available, it might not be immediately available, but you have to tap into those people, tap into those knowledge sources and get that data out. That's your tacit knowledge. So through analytics and interactive analytics recovery, you are able to transform your tacit knowledge, which is not something that you know directly, into something that you know. Are you following me? Right? So you have explicit knowledge, which is what we know. We know that we know this. Then the other part, which we don't know what we know, through interactive analytics or whatever, you can transform that knowledge to what we know. That's one part of it. And then the bottom part of it, we know what we don't know. Am I confusing you guys? I'm hoping I'm not. Think of it, right? Example. Let's say in our cake, systems, we know the different distribution of different people. Like say how many devices we have per merchant, per operator, for example. That's something that we know. We know it's there in the Salesforce data. We know for each record, we know each operator, we have data that we know. That knowledge is what we know. We know it's there in our database. We know that this data or relationships or trends are available in our database. That's the part we know. So analytics, you can uncover those patterns. You can uncover those specific trends and what is available to us. Then the last part is, we don't even know what the questions we need to ask, because it's not visible to us. We don't know that. To ask even the right question, we don't know what the question is. That part is very vague. It's knowledge that is there in our data. Right now, we don't even know what to look for. That's where data science comes in. The ability to dig into that data, and when you are going into those data, you see what the questions that we need to ask from that data. Am I making sense? I know it's a bit of a jumble of words to a certain extent, but try to understand the concept. There are things that we know. There are things that we don't know, but we know it's in the people's heads. We need to uncover those data. That's the data mining or data uncover or data recovery part of it. Then we know some of the things that are there in the data and the questions that we need to ask to get that data out. That is the last, that's the bottom right hand corner, my right hand, right? We know how to recover it. And then the last part is, we don't even know what the questions that we need to ask. That's where data science comes in. Am I making sense? This is where big data comes in my humble opinion. This is where big data comes in. By having this all consolidated data coming from various sources, from your manufacturing, from your warehousing aspects, from your selling and purchasing aspects, from your promotions that are running through, being able to relate to this data through data or big data concepts is what is going to give us that competitive advantage across all the other three challenges that we spoke of. First one, for example, is food traceability. Being able to trace, how this food was manufactured, developed, and so on. You are able to now, through big data, identify some of those patterns. You are able to go into your limited time promotions and optimize them based on seasonal variations or whatever, using the data that is available to you. And then the third one, the part when it comes to routing, optimizing your routing, shipping, storage, all of that can be optimized through the data that is available to us, through the concept of big data. Am I making sense? So hopefully, some of the important concepts here or emerging trends from an innovation point of view are machine learning, collected or connected with big data. You are able to predict things, as well as data mining, right? Those are some of the technology concepts that have come forward in the food services industry to make sense of that knowledge that is there or data that is there. How do you transform that to knowledge which you can use for better decision making? Am I making sense? Right. So using big data, you are able to first describe what the problems are. Through the trending data or whatever, you are able to identify what are the problems, for example. That is your description of your data. Second part is you are able to diagnose what the problems are. You are doing the diagnosing, just like a doctor, right? You see the reports, you diagnose what the problem might be. Second one is you try to predict using the models or forecasting or various other different concepts of data analytics, data science. You are able to forecast or predict what might happen in the future. And then naturally you take the prescription. Prescription as in what you're going to do about it. So from a food services point of view, these are some of the applications, some of the key applications, right? For example, price elasticity. Are you guys aware that, for BT Studio, we are doing 2 projects. I can't remember the specific names, but one is on pricing, that is how we sell to the consumer. What are the prices that should be there for selling to the consumer? A separate part is costing. How are we going to pay, or how are we going to negotiate the prices for purchasing, for example? 2 different systems. And those are complex algorithms, taking into economic factors, production factors, ground level, other different various sources. So complex modeling of those pricing algorithms can definitely benefit from big data. And it might be an advantage. So naturally price competitiveness is a big, when it comes to restaurant industry, for example, if you have the same product, same quality available at a lower price, you will not buy it from the higher price, right? So your pricing is a very important factor when it comes to food services. And those kind of things can benefit. Your time offering, or your limited time offer programs, those can benefit from big data. Predicting cannibalization of different products. What is that? Any ideas? What is cannibalization? That's correct. If you have competing products, right? Introducing a new product might eat into your own market share of the other product. This is especially true when it comes to countries like, developed countries like US. Now, for example, when I want to buy some tea in Colombo, you go to the supermarket. What are the options you have? You might have green tea, black tea. You might have Earl's Grey, whatever, certain brands. And Dilma and, let's say Lipton, whatever, a few other brands. Have you guys gone shopping in US? I mean, some of you have, I'm sure. You go to a US supermarket like Walmart or whatever, buying tea is a complex program. Because there will be a whole shelf full of, different types of teas. There will be different green teas, different brands, different countries, like hundreds of them. So how do you choose tea? This is my own experience. When you go to buy tea, for example, you spend 10 minutes trying to figure out what is what. It's a difficult choice because there are so many different choices. So that's where cannibalization can happen. You introduce a new product, you might eat in because the same consumers might buy that product instead of buying that product that you already had a market advantage. So through big data, you are able to predict what might happen depending on consumer behaviors in the past or whatever other models that you use to identify how this whole thing is going to work. And the last one is obviously logistics optimizations. How do you plan your routes, your storage, and so on and so forth. So far with me, those are the 4 challenges that we looked at. And again, I'm reiterating the fact that what I wanted to do is, these are big subjects, guys. I mean, these are things that dedicated people will study for a long period of time. Expert, will come in, in different stages. If you take Cisco, for example, different divisions, different departments, prioritizing some of these and, looking across. What I'm trying to do is to plant a few seeds that you guys will go back and hopefully read through. I want to conclude with some of the technology aspects of all what we discussed, these 4 challenges. For me, there are 4 distinct trends that are, coming up from a technology point of view. Given that we are a technology company, and I'm hoping, I don't know whether anybody in our current, higher level people who matter, who take decisions is listening on to my innovation session. But I'm hoping that they will take some of the notes of, what we discussed. Simply because if we are a technology, company that is providing solutions for Cisco, some of these key buzzwords are now popping up more often than not. Machine learning, big data, blockchain, Internet of Things. So as a company, I feel, as individuals, as engineers and operations or wherever, some of these understanding will come in handy in the future, because that's the future. Already companies, food services companies, are trying to create distinct advantages for themselves by using some of these concepts and developing them or applying them to the food services industry. Blockchain is a good example, right? So similarly, I'm hoping that if somebody is listening, as a company, we will also invest into some of these new areas and have good understanding of some of these. When Cisco turns attention to revamping some of their supply chains or pricing algorithms or optimization of their promotional programs, we will be ready to provide cutting-edge solutions in the future, right? So that's it. Any questions? I'm free to feel free to bring up. I'm more than glad to answer.